I'm Linda Tadic, and I currently am CEO of Digital Bedrock. Okay, well, so I don't belong to that group from the FACTAC group. I came on board when AMIA was really just founded in 1991. And so I have to go back to how then I even heard about AMIA, this new organization. That was back in 1991, and I was at that time a contract cataloger with the National Moving Image Database, or NAMID, which came out of the AFI. In Los Angeles. And I had already had cataloging experience at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. That was my first baby archives job in the mid-'80s. And so I knew how to catalog in MARC format and in film collections in MARC format. And that's what NAMID was doing. And so they were hiring people to go out and be contract catalogers all over the country, archives around the country, to catalog for them, to catalog their collections in MARC or to help convert the collections. But anyway, so Margaret Byrne, who was the original director of NAMID, she told me sometime in like the summer, and I believe probably the conference was in the fall, the first conference in New York. She said, this is a really interesting group that's being founded, and you should go to this conference. And of course, I was a poor contract cataloger, and so I thought, living in Los Angeles. So I said, all right. So I scraped together airfare and could stay with my sister-in-law in New York, and went to the conference. And I thought, wow, this is home. And even though, if I recall, it was like 192 people, although I'm sure that others will know the exact numbers, just for some reason that stuck in my mind, that it was such a great group of people. And I knew that that was the first conference where we all heard about vinegar syndrome. There's a presentation from Kodak. That was the first time we heard about that. There were people who were interested in cataloging, and Martha Yee, who had been my former boss at the UCLA Film Archive, was the first chair of the cataloging committee. And so I met her. I met a lot of people, for the first time, who have now become 25 years long friends. Yeah. So anyway, shared interest and camaraderie, and and so I've been to every single AMIA conference since. I started my career in the analog era, as many of us did. Working with physical media, and then when things started going digital, then I would say in my career from 2000 on, I've only been doing digital work, and everything before that was analog, and then this border time of where it was both as we were going from one to the other. But because I've been very active in the organization since the beginning, so I became chair of the cataloging committee in 1994 and was involved then with, because I started out as a cataloger, as I kind of alluded to, starting out with NAMID and starting at UCLA Film and Television Archive, and then changed on to take other roles as like director of the Media Archives and Peabody Awards Archive at the University of Georgia and other jobs. But anyway, so I started as a cataloger, and so I was chair of the cataloging committee and helping that group then be involved in revising the AMIA cataloging standard with Library of Congress, working with LC. So that was a cooperative project between AMIA and the Library of Congress. And so just the opportunity then to work with these other catalogers, around Library of Congress, and then also I spearheaded the first compendium of moving image cataloging practice, which then again brought AMIA and to just do outreach to all these organizations around the world, really, mainly in the US, but around international as well, about how do you catalog your stuff, that you have. And so that just opening out, not just being, not just looking at our navels, but also like saying, hey, what is everybody else doing? How can we learn from you all? And so that kind of is like the model for how AMIA has always worked. So it's not just through like getting together at the conference and everybody talking and sharing information, but also working on projects together to learn from each other and to move the field forward. So I would say that, so cataloging, it definitely impacted all my work in cataloging and everything, going forward. But then as I started doing other things in my career as well, so like managing physical collections when I was at the University of Georgia with the Peabody Archive, and then from digital on. And so the organization started shifting. I'll never forget the Bethesda conference in 1997, and Bill Farrell going through the hallway and saying like, sprockets, I must see sprockets, because everything was digital. That was the first conference where everything was, not everything, but many of the sessions were on digital stuff and digital technologies and what are we going to do. That was the first time where it really started hitting. And so that was around the time when my career started going also more towards the digital era, arena as well. And as I mentioned, from 2000 on, it's all been digital, work. in digital assets. And so you could see that happening with The Real Thing, for example, too, which of course The Real Thing isn't an AMIA project, but it is so closely aligned with AMIA since it, occurs at AMIA conferences. It started, starting out just with film restoration techniques, but then starting to have digital restoration techniques and bringing in more and more and more digital technologies as that's gone on. And so I find that AMIA, back to the original question, how has that impacted my career? It's because I've learned through it. I've learned from communicating with colleagues, working on projects with colleagues, seeing how the community and field is changing based on, if you just look at the old programs from all the conferences, and you can just see the whole history of our field through the presentations in the programs. The Compendium was an amazing project. I'm not just saying because of me, definitely not, but it's amazing in the sense of how much information people gave. In fact, they gave so much information that it couldn't go into the printed book, and so they had to put the examples online. So that was, okay, I'm going ahead of myself. So the Compendium project, again, it came out when I was chair of the cataloging committee, and we're all talking about what do you do, how do you catalog this or that? And not everybody was doing MARC format, and that was like the standard, at the time. And so, we started talking about, wouldn't it be great to see what other people are doing? How are you grappling with a problem? What is a title? How do you do physical description? What do you do with all this digital stuff that's starting to come up? And so we said, let's put together this compendium where we ask specific questions of like, how do you solve a certain problem? And can you give examples? And can you really describe how you came to how you're making those decisions? And so I don't remember how many organizations there were. It was over a dozen, that gave us really detailed information, but there were even more that actually responded to a survey. And so this was actually then, and people had really detailed responses because we asked for sample records from people, because even though you could describe how you're doing a certain project, a cataloging record is worth 1,000 words, just to see what people are doing, and to see that kind of mapping across, of how people do things or approach specific problems. So this was also then a joint project between AMIA and Society of American Archivists. So the AMIA, I don't remember if it was a publications committee or the board, but somebody approached SAA and said, would you be willing to publish this? And so the Society of American Archivists actually published the compendium. But again, we couldn't include all the sample records. There were just so many sample records. So the records were scanned, and they were made available on the AMIA website. And I think they're no longer up there because people ask now and then, where are those records? Because even though the records might date from 1997, because I started the compendium project in 1994 with a survey, and in 1995 I moved to Georgia, from Berkeley to Georgia, to be director of the Media Archives Peabody Awards Archive. And then in 97 I was elected to be AMIA president. So I became president, for 98 and 99. And so I had to give up the compendium, and so then I gave it to, her last name is Lieb. I'm sorry, I'm having a senior moment.
Andrew Lieb?
No, no, it starts with, Lieb. Not Andrew Lieb.
Oh. Yes, I saw it. I looked it up.
Abigail Lieb.
Abigail Lieb.
Yes, there was an A. Yes, that's what God, Abigail, I'm sorry. It's a senior moment. I'm getting old. And so Abigail was fabulous, and so somebody had to take on the editorial work to get it to publication, and so she took it on, and then she carried it forward and completed the job. And so it was published, the actual guidelines, the analysis, because it required a lot of analysis. So it was a team of people who were analyzing the records and describing this is why, and look at seeing comparisons between how a news organization like CNN might catalog versus like UCLA Film and Television Archive might catalog, and everything in between, how you would catalog like shot level stock footage, how do you catalog that in comparison, and seeing commonalities and differences, and again learning from each other. And even to this day, well, until now their records are down. I don't know why they're down, but anyway, people still refer to the records all the time, even though they're like 1997. Oh my gosh, it's like 20 years old, almost. And so anyway, so there's a revision now, or not a revision actually, because it's a brand new document, but the concept of the compendium is now going forward under Thelma Ross, where it's selected, but again, times have changed. Selected archives are participating, where they're adding a lot more digital materials. How do you catalog digital content? What do you do with technical metadata? And so it's shifted in that sense, even though it's going around some of the same concepts, but not everybody's doing MARC now, and it's like, how do you use Ferber, the Ferber model in your records? So, but it's great to see that going forward, and I actually don't know right now the status of it. Last time I heard it was actually going on pretty well, because Thelma was doing it all and she was just talking to me at the beginning. But anyway, so that eventually will come out, I imagine within the next year, even though I don't know, but I'm imagining within the next year in 2016, it'll probably come out. Let's see, so I was elected in 97, so I came on board at the end of the Bethesda conference, and I was the first 2-year president that they had. Everybody else before that was 1 year, but they were vice president for the year before, so they that's usually how it worked at that time, up until then. And so at that point, AMIA, that was 97, so it was like 5 years along, 6 years long, and I decided my main things I wanted to do was to get the first strategic plan through. Because you could already see at that point, even in AMIA's young history, that it had potential for growth. And, we had all seen too many nonprofit organizations, try to do too much at the beginning and then they fail, and then sometimes also not push themselves enough, and so they just remain limited. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to step back and see, how do we perceive the organization, how can it grow, how can it go forward? And so I thought, okay, I'm a 2-year president, and I thought, all right. So I figured it would take a year for me to convince the board to do this, and in the second year we would actually do the strategic plan, and that's pretty much what happened. And anyway, so it was done. So at least there was looking, at the organization seriously to see about how we want to grow instead of just being a more casual organization. So that was one thing. And the other thing that I'm really happy about was the Miami conference. Oh, that was so much fun. That was like my favorite conference of all. Boy, oh boy, that's when sponsors had money, and then we had some fabulous sponsors. We had parties. It was at the Fontainebleau in Miami, and so it was right along the beach, so all these people escaped from the Northeast and came down to the conference. And Iron Mountain sponsored a dance party outside. They had a steel drum band playing. And I'll never forget, and Jim Wheeler won the Silver Lad Award that night, and so everybody's kind of standing around the edge, and I thought, oh God, we got to go out there dancing. So I went and said, Jim, come on, let's go out and dance. And so we went out onto the dance floor, Jim Wheeler and I, and just started, dancing. And then I also made a, I'm going to embarrass somebody now. So, and then I also made a pact with myself that I'm going to get all the men on the AMIA board to dance. And so I went up and I asked all of the men, I said, hey, come on, dance. And they said, no, except Grover. Grover's on the board. Grover was the only one who danced. And that was really great. And it was just, and then within like 20 minutes or whatever, everybody was on the dance floor. Oh, it was such a fun party. It was fun. I mean, and then of course the infamous, like the boat ride around Miami along the river, and where again there was like food and music, and it was just like, I miss parties. They don't have enough parties at AMIA. There isn't enough social opportunities like there used to be, because look at what happens at the opening night reception. That's really the only reception party that we have where everybody's here, because by the time of the evening cocktails, a lot of people have already gone, for the last night cocktails. So I do wish that there'd be more parties, but then again, those cost money, and so then you need to have sponsors to sponsor the parties, and so that's an issue. I mean, the field has definitely changed. As the usual sponsors, who would support the organization in its first 10, 12 years, as the labs go out of business. Kodak was a huge sponsor for years, and of course they're gone. And so anyway, maybe new forms of sponsorship will arise, because then we'll have more social gatherings. Yeah, I would say that the nature of the membership, as we've gotten bigger, it's changed over time, and which is a good thing. I mean, the fact that there are more members of more diverse backgrounds. And when it started, the first conference, it was primarily the large archives that were present there. So the FACTAC members, Nitrate Holding Archives, large archives, and some smaller ones, but it was a small group at the beginning anyway. And it was a lot of, and then in the first several years, it was the film studios, it was the broadcasters, And I appreciated their presence because they tended to be the ones who were really grappling with a lot of the issues that we all, then it was kind of like trickle down. They were the ones who were having to deal with the new technologies that were coming out, and so we learned from that as well. And then things started shifting, and you know, of course, regional archives came in, which is a good thing, and then with the student programs coming in, we have students coming in as well. But the studios and the broadcasters have gone away. You know, they don't come to AMIA anymore. And I miss their presence. It's like the only broadcasters you see coming now are HBO, you know, because they have a strong contingent that come. Andrea now, you know, re-elected the first, you know, president's been elected twice now, Andrea. From Paramount, so maybe they'll, and there was somebody from Warner Brothers here this year, so maybe they'll start trickling back in. But I miss them because they're the ones who can, I feel like too often in some of the meetings, the conversations that that are going on is like people don't understand, well, what's an ARRI camera, what's a red camera, what is all the technical metadata, what are all these things that these archivists, the folks who are entering the field now, that's the same thing as like 35mm camera negative, you know, and because they're not being exposed to that as formerly they would have been, you know, when those folks were coming to the conference and presenting on what they're doing. They're not being trained in a way, they're not understanding this other kind of group of archives. They're not understanding digital asset management in the sense that the broadcasters have to deal with it. And so I miss those folks, and I wish they would come back. But I feel like they're probably thinking there's nothing here for them, so it's an awful, just like in the beginning, maybe the smaller archives, regional archives, felt there was nothing for them. And so I don't think that it has to be one or the other. It's not a zero-sum game. It really needs to get back to the time period or the idea where it really is, I mean, it really truly is inclusive, and not inclusive because they're not saying no, don't come, but in the sense of like where there are sessions, you know. And so I think there needs to be more outreach to the broadcasters in the studios to say, please come, you know, if you can get away, you know, from your jobs, because we want to hear what you're experiencing and learn from what they're experiencing, because again, it's all trickle down, you know. We all we all will be dealing with the technologies which they currently are dealing with, and we can learn from them.